Earlier in March this year, I published a video describing how to use Sass with Themekit, following Shopify's announcement that they were deprecating Sass from Shopify themes. Then, in July 2021, Shopify announced that the CLI had been extended to work with themes and now became the new recommended tool for local theme development. Soon enough, you guys started to ask the question, how do you create a Sass workflow with the new Shopify CLI for themes? So in this video, I'm going to show you how we can apply a similar build process as we did with Themekit, but this time with the Shopify CLI. Let's get started. In this video, we're going to skip the theory surrounding Shopify CLI and Gulp.js, as we have covered them in previous videos. So if you want to know more about Shopify CLI, I have a standalone video on that. And if you want to learn more about Gulp, which is the tool we use to compile our SCSS in this video and in the previous video on Themekit, then you can check out the video on using SCSS with Themekit, where I go more in depth with Gulp. Because we're just basically copying the same process, but with a different build tool, so we're going from Themekit to Shopify CLI, I'm not going to spend too much talking about the same thing we talked about in that video. In this video, we're just going to jump straight in and install Shopify CLI, install our node dependencies, including Gulp. I'm going to copy across the Gulp file, and then I will demonstrate to you live how we can use SCSS inside of Shopify CLI, and then of course push those changes to our theme library. So as you can see on my screen, I've got my code editor in the background here, which is Visual Studio Code. Whoops, I accidentally clicked on something. Just expanding it there. And then in the other tab, I've got my terminal application here. So the first thing I'm going to do is navigate to the folder in which I want to create my theme folder. So it's going to be my Skillshare folder inside my code folder. And then inside here, I will first verify that I have Shopify CLI installed. So make sure you do that. If you don't have that already, you can check if you have Shopify CLI installed by just running Shopify version. And if you get a version number back, then you clearly have Shopify CLI installed. All right, I'll clear that. And now what I'm going to do is log into my Shopify store. So I'm going to run the command Shopify login, followed by -- store, and then the URL, the my Shopify URL of my shop, which is christestingshop.myshopify.com. Now it's going to open up a new tab in my browser, and I just need to select the account that I have as a staff account on my Chris Testing Shop, which is this one. Then it'll say authenticated successfully. You may now close this page. So now I'm going to swap back to my terminal application here. And as you can see, it says logged into christestingshop.myshopify.com as staff, which is very important. You can't log in as a collaborator through your partner's account. It has to be a staff member. We learned that in the last video on Shopify CLI. Anyway, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a new theme. I'm going to run the command Shopify Theme Init, which will clone the Dawn theme into our folder here, and then we can start to work with it. So I'm going to run Shopify Theme Init and call the theme Dawn with SCSS. Now it's going to clone from Dawn as it's stored on GitHub. And so now that that's done, what I can do is open up that project in my code editor. So I'm going to close down the terminal application. Let's open up Visual Studio Code. And then I just need to select that folder from my Skillshare folder, Dawn with SCSS. I'll click to open that. And let's close down some of these windows here. But here you can see we've got the Dawn theme now locally on our computer. So if we go into templates, we can see all the JSON templates. This is definitely the Dawn theme. All right, so what I'm going to do is I need my terminal back. So I'm going to run one inside of my code editor. I'll say yes to these warnings, clear this. And so now we have Shopify CLI with the Dawn theme. What we can do to run this theme is run Shopify Theme Serve. And now it's going to create a local development version of this theme so we can actually see our changes happening when we edit it locally. Alright, so for me that took about 88 seconds, hopefully less time for you, but finally we've got this URL that we can open our browser. So I'm going to hold down Command, click on that, and then now I can access Chris Testing Shop via my Dawn theme from on my local computer. Alright, so now we just need to install the dependencies. So number one, you're going to need Shopify CLI, obviously, which we've just used. We're going to need to have Node installed. We need to have npm installed, and you need to have gulp CLI installed. Okay, if you're unclear about any of those, I go into more detail on how to have all of those dependencies inside of my video on SCSS with Themekit. So I encourage you to check out that video, or if you have any questions on where you can find that information, you can leave a comment below as well. But as long as you have Shopify CLI, Gulp CLI, Node, and npm installed, then you have all the dependencies to follow along in this video. So because this tab is currently being taken up by this theme serve, I'm going to create a new tab here, clear this, and I'm going to run the command npm init to create a new Node project. I'm just going to hit enter to everything. And now you can see it's created a package.json file. Now we just need to install our gulp packages. So the first one is npm install gulp. You can see as I'm installing that, it's now creating a node_modules folder. And there you can see we've got a package-lock.json file as well as our package.json file. Let's just make sure in our git ignore that we don't have node modules selected. So git ignore, everything in this file here will be ignored when we push to git. So that's important that we don't actually push our node modules folder. That is pretty standard with every node project you will do. So I'll close that one down once we've put node modules in our git ignore. And then the second command I'm going to run is npm install node sass and gulp sass. I'll hit enter to install those dependencies. And then now what I'm going to do is copy over a gulp.js file from a previous project. So I'm going to click into my folder structure here, paste it in, and here you can see we have some code which I'll explain to you in just a second. I'm just going to clean this up a bit. We don't need Themekit, so I'm going to remove that dependency, and I don't have auto prefixer installed on this one. Let's just keep it real simple. And I'll save those changes. So in this video, like I said, we're not going to go deep into gulp, so I'm not going to type it word by word, but what I will say is we've got our requirements here. We've got gulp and we've got Sass, because gulp can compile not just Sass but JS as well. So we need to specify that we want to use Sass, and what this task does here is when run, so if I type in gulp Sass, it will take all of the SCSS files in my styles folder, which we haven't created yet. It'll run this process of Sass on them, which will compile them into CSS, and then it'll output them into the assets folder, which is where we store our CSS in Shopify themes. Okay. Now we've got this second task here, which is watch, and what that does, it'll watch for changes to any SCSS files in our styles folder, and then if it detects any changes, it will then run this task up here, which will then compile all the SCSS into Sass. We've got our one-time task for triggering Sass, and we've got our watch task, which will trigger this task if it detects any changes. Okay, so before we run gulp Sass, let's actually create that folder. So I'm going to create not a new file, a new folder here, and call it styles. This is totally arbitrary. You can call it whatever you want. Just make sure it matches up with the path you specify here. And in here, what I might do, so if we look at our assets folder in Dawn, you can see that all the CSS is broken up into different components and different sections. So here you can see section main product. What I'm going to do is, in a previous project, I replaced this section main product with just a product.css for the product page. So let's use that as an example. In my styles folder, I'm going to go in new file and create just a product.scss. And let's type in something that is clearly CSS. So I'm going to say color equals black, and then I'm going to type in body color is going to be color. I'm going to hit save on that, and then let's run gulp Sass, see what happens. As you can see, we've got a bit of an issue. It cannot find the module Sass. So heading back into our gulp file here and checking our package.json file here, we do have gulp Sass installed, and then we're bringing it into Sass here. I think I've forgotten one dependency here, which is the Sass dependency. So let me just install that one, npm install Sass, and then let me run gulp Sass again. And now you can see we've got an error here in our compilation. I put an equals rather than a colon. So I'm going to fix that. Run gulp Sass again. And as you can see, we have started and finished compiling the Sass into CSS. And if I go into my assets folder here and scroll down, we can see product.css, and that SCSS code that we have here has compiled into CSS over here. So there you have one example. I'm going to delete product.scss and its compiled version of, where was it? Product.css, because we've already got our section there for the product, which is, if I scroll back up, section main product. But let's just say we created a new section. Let's just say it was like some sort of gallery section. So if I were to go in here, create a section by the name of gallery section, and then I created a SCSS file in here called gallery. You know, you could call it gallery section.scss, and then maybe we've got a class of gallery in here. And so I can throw in something like a padding, 20 pixels, background color, red, something like that. And then when I run gulp Sass, that will compile into the same folder as all of our other sections here. In fact, I should probably follow the convention here and use section dash, not gallery section. So I'm going to rename this to section gallery, so it follows the convention there. And then I'm going to find it in here. Here you can see our compiled CSS. Delete that one, and then run gulp Sass again. And then up here we can see that the compiled CSS is in with our other sections. Now, how it works in Dawn, as we saw in one of the previous videos where we looked more in depth at Dawn, in previous themes of Shopify, there has been just one CSS file, but what they've done in Dawn is they've broken it up into multiple CSS files. So if you look at the product template, for instance, which is linking to the main product section, you can see we load in all this different component CSS, and we load in the CSS for the section up here as its own CSS file. So we can use that same theory when we create new sections. We can go into here, and let's just copy the syntax from main product. I can just go in here, grab that tag, copy it over here, and change this to gallery rather than main product. So now that enables us to write SCSS over here. Obviously the SCSS and the CSS look identical here, but if I was to do something a little bit more sassy, like gallery inner, and then had display flex, something like that, and then I ran gulp Sass, then you can see over here that it gets compiled into CSS instantly, or after 75 milliseconds at least. Okay, so obviously every time we make a change, we probably don't want to be running gulp Sass, and that's why we have our process here, which is gulp watch. So I'm going to run that gulp watch, and just like Themekit watch and gulp watch, as we used it when we were working with Themekit, it's going to check for any changes to files. But in this instance, because we're using CLI, we only have to check the SCSS files. We don't have to check the changes to any of the other files in here as we're using CLI. All right, so now if I make a change here, so I'll say justify content center, and I hit save on that, you can see it triggers the Sass command straight away. And if I look in here, we've got that addition to our CSS file straight away. Okay, so this is kind of the workflow. I have one tab open that's doing the Sass compilation, so running gulp Sass, or gulp watch rather, and having that run right next to my other tab where I'm running Shopify theme serve. So we're serving the theme here, and if we were to update the SCSS here while we have gulp watch running, then that will automatically switch over to CSS, and then we link to the CSS file, not the SCSS file in our theme itself. So from Shopify's perspective, there is no SCSS. We're just compiling it every time we make a change with SCSS, and then the CSS goes into this assets folder, and then that assets folder is what gets loaded into the theme. But for us, we get the benefit of using SCSS, so this is something I have done on my most previous project and something I will continue to do on all my future projects, because using SCSS, I'm sure a lot of you guys can attest to this, once you start using it, you do not want to go back to using regular CSS, especially with something like this, like nesting. You get really used to writing code in this way. So the next question might be, yeah, we've got all this code locally, but how do we get it onto our store, into our theme library? Well, for that, I recommend the GitHub integration. And the good thing about using the GitHub integration is that we can track our SCSS, and then we can push the whole project, including the styles folder, but the styles folder doesn't actually go in the theme library. So you're getting the benefit of tracking SCSS without having it cause any problems with your theme. Let's see that in action now. I'm going to create a new tab here so that we can run some git commands. Again, I'm going to get rid of these pesky warnings. And what I'm going to do is create a new git repository, git init. And then I'm going to have to obviously create a GitHub repository. So I'm going to go into my GitHub account. I'm going to use this tab up here to create a new repository. Let's just call it Dawn with SCSS. And I'm going to click create repository. And then here we can make our first commit and then add the remote origin. So I'm going to do git add, git commit, initial commit, and then add that remote origin. And then what we're going to do is do a git push origin master. Alright, so now switching back over to our GitHub, we can now see that our theme has been pushed to GitHub. I kind of rushed it a bit there. If you're new to GitHub, definitely check out my video on using the GitHub integration with Shopify. I'm kind of combining a bunch of different topics here, and so I don't want to go spend too long on individual topics when I've already covered them on this channel. So I'll put the link up here somewhere where you can go check out how to do the GitHub integration with Shopify. This is kind of bringing it all together to use SCSS with CLI. Okay, so now that we have this up here, we have our styles folder committed, and we can, track changes with it. But what we can do when we actually log into our store, heading into our theme library, if we have the GitHub integration already set up, then we can connect that theme to our store. And this is the workflow that I recommend people use, is using the GitHub integration. So I'm going to click connect from GitHub, use my account, and then select Dawn with SCSS. I actually don't have access, so I'm going to have to update my permissions here. I only have certain repositories whitelisted, so I'm just going to have to whitelist this one as well. Save that. And then now if I refresh, I should be able to access that repository. Add theme, connect from GitHub, select my account, and then select that repository. Dawn with SCSS, and then connect the master branch. All right, so heading back over here, it's now going to spin up that branch. I will just call it Dawn with SCSS. And then if we look inside the code for this, you'll see that this follows the normal structure of a Shopify theme. And what you'll notice is that the styles folder has been omitted. So as long as we make sure to commit the SCSS file as well as the CSS file while we are doing our development, then all the changes that we made will go in one of these CSS files and then exist in the version on our theme library while still tracking the SCSS in GitHub and on our local computer. So just to demonstrate that real quickly, now that we're running Git or we're tracking our code with Git, if I was to make a change here, let's just say we add another one, align item center. You can see that we've made a change here, but we've also made an automatic change here if we are running our gulp watch command. All right. So now if we go into our changes here, you can see we have two files that have changed, the SCSS file and the CSS file. The SCSS file is just for us. It doesn't actually make it to the theme in the theme library. And the CSS file is what makes it to the theme in the theme library. So it's very important that you commit both of these files when you are running through your workflow. All right. So as I alluded to previously, this is kind of the workflow. I set up my project. I run Shopify Theme Serve, I run Gulp Sass, or Gulp Watch rather, and then I start to make my changes, checking as I go on my local version here. When I'm ready to make that change to the version on my Shopify store, so right here in my theme library, let's say I want to push that to this theme right here, then I will check out my changes here. I will stage them, let's say add extra line to gallery inner. This is not a great commit message, but just for the sake of it, I'm just going to put that in, hit enter, and then I'm going to hit publish changes. That's now going to send that up to GitHub, which is then going to push it across to the linked theme in our theme library here. All right, so hopefully that made sense and I didn't rush it too much. Again, I didn't want to go into too much detail on the GitHub integration, on Shopify CLI, on Gulp necessarily because we've covered all those topics previously, but I think a few of you had trouble kind of piecing it all together and kind of just wanted to see how it all worked together. As you can see here, it's a very similar process to Themekit. With Themekit, we had to trigger Themekit watch when we changed a file using Gulp and then trigger the change in SCSS as well. But here, because we're using Shopify CLI and running our theme locally, any changes we make to our CSS and to our files just gets updated automatically and then we can view it locally. The only thing we really need to watch for is the SCSS, which doesn't come standard in Shopify. So that's why we use Gulp, and we have everything set up in this Gulp file here. So when we run Gulp watch, it's going to check for all of the SCSS in the styles folder, compile it into this assets folder. And if we follow the same sort of convention that has been set up in Dawn, we just link that CSS where we need it. And the SCSS is just for us in the local version, just to make things easier. So as you can see, guys, adding SCSS to your Shopify CLI workflow is a very similar process to what we've seen with Themekit. Obviously, with Dawn, you've got multiple CSS files to work with, but you can just as easily use the one CSS file like we did in the Themekit video. If you learned something new today, please give this video a thumbs up. And if you'd like to go deeper into theme development, I'd encourage you to check out my mastermind community, which you can find at shopifythemedeveloper.com. Happy coding, and I'll see you on the next video.